Beginning of today's show, I'm going to put it this way, and very directly. For political junkies, this is the type of program that you really relish. We're going to be joined today by a man who is an Idahoan, but he's got one of the longest resumes, political resumes, in the Western world. And that's no joke. He's got experience working in the vice president's office. He's traveled extensively around the world. He speaks fluent Mandarin. He's got good connections in government and the business world. And he's running for lieutenant governor, one of five well known Republicans in the state of Idaho who are actually in this race at the time. We've got more, I know, but five are probably very well known. Steve Millington is in studio with us too, as well, and he's signaling me various numbers because he's actually doing the counting. We got a six. Hold on. For some reason, Steve, you're not coming through, but there you go.
Am I live?
You are
Now
live.
I'm real. We now recently had a sixth member join that elite group of people.
Right, which is a very late start, which means we've basically got five. And the one who's probably best known among those five is Steve Yates. He's the former chairman of the state Republican Party, and he joins us this morning on Top Story, 7 minutes after 8 o'clock right now. It's 33. And first of all, Chairman, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill and Steve. It's great to be with you.
We wanted to start right off the top. We're down to, I guess, the real crunch time, 60 days or so before primary day. Where do you think that you stand right now in this particular contest?
Well, I'm very reassured by how the campaign has unfolded. Candidates are somewhat questionable judgments of how things are going because it takes a little bit of extra confidence to jump in and do something like this. And Idaho is verifiably a large geographic state and takes a lot of work to get out there and contact voters. But been doing that for a good while now. And when it comes to fundraising, volunteers in every major region of the state, some unscientific polling, and just the general feedback from people, we feel very good about the position that we're in for the campaign and looking forward to crunch time. 2 months to go. Unfortunately, not everyone wakes up every day wondering who the next lieutenant governor is, and we'd like to talk to them about that. There's understandably a lot of focus on the top job of governor being open this cycle, and that's incredibly important. And we understand people are engaged, and we just want to reach those undecided voters, and hopefully they'll go to yatesforidaho.com and give us a look.
We were talking a bit off air, and one of the big stories that I think was engaging, at least from a news perspective, not just in Idaho, but it was getting a lot of national attention over the last few weeks, was Idaho's attempt to offer some, I won't call them cut rate, but offer some alternative health care plans, which people in the federal government have now said will violate the spirit of the law, the Affordable Care Act. And yet there's still some debate about what Idaho can do here. As prospectively, keep in mind, of course, anybody running for lieutenant governor, if they get elected, they're a heartbeat away from the top job. And also when the other governor goes out of state, you assume the role of acting governor. But when you look at this particular issue, do you think that Idaho has an argument to actually stand on?
Well, I think on principle, Idaho has a very strong argument to stand on in going a way different from the Obamacare exchange model. Whether in this particular case, it's the one that works and how our representatives engage the federal government. Obviously, it was not an outcome that satisfied them on either side of the equation, so there's more work to do. Fundamentally, I just believe that we have to look larger than insurance as our primary point of contact in the medical industry. We have to get back to doctors and patients being a core relationship and decisions made there. I'm one of those small business owners who, for the last better part of a decade, have had the privilege of paying $15,000 a year on premiums for the privilege of paying cash for everything that I consume in healthcare for my family. And for a small business owner that's an average family of four, that can be $25,000 to $30,000 a year just taken off the top. That's a second income. That is a mom or a father having to stay home to take care of things. That's no vacations, no savings for school. Even if we succeed in getting these exemptions, we're still in a very bad place in healthcare. I think we have to go bigger and bolder to get out of this bad model.
And then a lot of that will depend, too, I suppose, on what actions happen over the next couple of years in the federal government. The Daily Signal from the Heritage Foundation this morning says that the reason we have a proposed bailout of insurers is simply because it's not working. So there's going to be some other model, I'm sure, that will be developed by the federal government, and that's going to impact us as well.
Absolutely. And I spent 5 years at the Heritage Foundation, long enough to know that they write a lot and they're pretty smart folks. And I would want to draw heavily on their ideas to look at what a marketplace of alternatives are out there. Fundamentally, we've got to go back to states being laboratories of reform. And we've got to look at best practices in other states, but there's got to be a true Idaho way of addressing the need for our families to have access to the health services they need. But not to make it a crippling expense. I mean, it's just outrageous that for the average young couple, that their outlays for health insurance could be a larger expense than their mortgage or car payments. How do you get ahead in life if we have this economic model that is just so alien to what my parents' generation was?
I got another one I want to throw at you. And yesterday I happened to see a poll from one of the candidates for governor, and he was just asking people their opinions, asking them to rank order various issues that were important to them, and he wanted to know what they thought about their tax rates. Well, this morning I came into the office, and Wallet Hub has a survey out that says Idaho is seventh place with overall effective state and local tax rates, which puts us in some pretty good company according to that survey. However, I know there are a lot of people out there who think we need to tweak things, and the governor has decided to go ahead and sign the tax package, the new tax package. Where do you think we stand? I mean, are we going to be able to, with some of the cuts and the like, are we going to be able to get moving forward here and continue to increase this economy?
Well, I definitely favor tax cuts. I think that you'll find that more than the average Republican running for office will say that. So I don't expect people to sit back and ooh and ah that this candidate said that he favors tax cuts. But I do think that we have to really look comprehensively at what the business and quality of life index is for Idaho relative to our neighboring states. One of the things that's a bit tricky is that a lot of our neighboring states have a very different mix of taxation compared to Idaho. And so when major businesses, manufacturers, or others are looking to locate in our state, there are a whole range of things they're looking at, and we may not be as competitive relative to our neighbors, even though tax rates might make us look okay. I know there's a lot of comparisons, especially in the Magic Valley and in East Idaho where I live, to where things are in Utah. They just have a very different kind of mix in their system. And I have a friend who actually has done their taxes in Idaho and then just for giggles ran it through the model for Utah, and the Idaho one came out a bit ahead. But there is definitely a perception that we're not competitive relative to our neighbors, and that is what I want to try to go after as hard as I can.
We wanted to mention Steve Yates is joining us on the telephone, and he's candidate for lieutenant governor, a Republican candidate, and of course he's competing in the big primary coming up in the month of May. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 34. Bill Colley with you, of course, on Top Story. Steve Millington is also joining us in studio, and the telephone number to reach the show today is 208-736-0300. And I know Steve Millington wanted to add something, too, as well.
Well, when Steve Yates, we'll call me Millington this morning so that when we talk about Steve, we know we're talking about Steve Yates. Mr. Yates mentioned the comparison between Idaho and Utah, just running the comparative taxes. One of my sons is a CPA over in the Meridian Caldwell has offices in both cities, and he often gets asked, well, how do we compare to Utah? And so Mr. Yates made the representation. They just had the people run both. He does that often. And Utah's income taxes, just on the following that code, the tax rate or the applicable tax payment in Utah is larger than the same situation in Idaho. We are not getting that message delivered to prospective employers, to prospective people who want to come to Idaho. And Mr. Yates is spot on. We are not telling the message strongly enough with enough substantiation. And that's one of the things we've got to get fixed.
Does that, Mr. Yates, put you out on the road maybe as an ambassador for Idaho to get that message across?
Well, traditionally, one of the core roles of lieutenant governor is economic development, which would include trade and investment promotion. I have some particular relationships with Idaho Top's trade partners, and a lot of our economy is internationalized, even in some of our older professions. But this role of trying to make us competitive relative to our neighbors and other states. I mean, we have a president who's really put the pedal to the metal in the economy with tax reform and deregulation. And I believe that we'll have some infrastructure spending that's coming down there. And people can have different economic interpretations of it. But the one thing it all is stimulative. And that means that we now have to figure out what along these lines we're going to do in Idaho to keep pace relative to our neighbors. I mean, we have to increase our economic base if we're going to have the resources to improve our infrastructure, which includes schools and quality of life, to make sure that we've got the opportunities for our kids to have the option to stay here, return here, grow and develop their families and businesses here in Idaho. And so I think that fulfilling that role is a major component of being a good lieutenant governor. Many of the past lieutenant governors have done that, and I would aim to do that in a similar way and possibly bring some new experience that improves upon it.
I read last week where the Boise area is becoming the next Silicon Valley as people come here. Now, that's got some positives, but it's also got the downsides because you need new sewer lines, you need new roads, housing costs are going to go up, and one writer even said it's like Denver was 30 years ago. That's something we've got to monitor, I imagine, closely and ensure that growth, I don't want to call it managed growth because I don't know that people in Idaho appreciate a lot of people having a lot of say in that, but we've got to be aware that this could happen and it's going to have a lot of impacts, good and bad.
I think it's very, very important. I think the euphemism that we try to use is smart growth because people tend to look kindly upon trying to be smart. But we have to be mindful that we are having an influx of a large number of people in some of the key geographies around our state. And as people come in, we have to have somewhat truth in pricing. When we have housing developments where people come in and they say, well, I've come from a more expensive geography and I did a great deal on a house, all of a sudden schools are overloaded, roads are overloaded, and bonds start popping up all over the place on elections. That's an added complication and expense for a lot of people. We have to have, I think, a coordinated state, local, but especially at local level, a coordinated approach to manage this growth in a way that the true expenses of the growth in population are factored into what people are paying when they come into the state, rather than having it be a sticker shock for the people who already live here over and over. I think that's politically and developmentally a problem that has emerged in the recent decade.
We're going to have more coming up in just a couple of minutes with Steve Yates, one of the Republicans running for lieutenant governor in Idaho. Primary day is coming up in the month of May. We have a short break, though, coming up at 8:20. It's 34. Steve Millington as well joining us in studio. Bill Colley on Top Story. And a quick reminder, tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Lauren Bostrom, who's a physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, is going to be joining us in studio. She's going to be talking about healthy eating and getting in shape for summer. You don't have the excuse it's too cold outside any longer to avoid the exercise. Keep in mind, Tripp Family Medicine still looking for new patients, located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. We wanted to point out as well, if you're a patient of Dr. Tripp or the staff, they can generally see you on the very same day, if not within 24 hours. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. As I said, more with Steve Yates on the way in just a couple of minutes. Don't get used to the warm temperatures. We're going to have temperatures perhaps some places in the mid-60s today. But by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we could see some snow in the forecast.
What?
If you're struggling to heat your home.
You guys are reading the wrong weather forecast here, Bill.
If you're struggling to heat your home, you've got to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. They do this work on furnaces and get them back up in tip-top running order. They get the job done and done right the first time. Ramsey Heating and Electric. 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number is 208-678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Steve Millington is in the studio with us this morning, but we're also on the telephone with Steve Yates, who's a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor in Idaho, having a conversation with him. And Mr. Yates has an event coming up next week right here in Twin Falls. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Sure. Well, we have some very kind folks in Twin Falls, two of them with the last name Millington, who are helping to co-host Meet and Greet at Idaho Joe's. And that will be Tuesday next week, March 20th, from 5 to 8 p.m. I've remembered my times right, Steve. And just encourage people who want to come and meet me to come and ask any questions, One of the things that's really wonderful about Idaho politics is if you haven't had direct access to candidates for statewide office, it's probably because you haven't tried. And I hope people will try. Come out and ask about background. Tell me what their thoughts are. I really appreciate the opportunity to listen as much as to share what my thoughts are. So just encourage all the listeners that are within range, please come by next Tuesday and say hello.
If I could interrupt just quickly, though, too, since you mentioned the fact that people have an opportunity, Idaho not being a huge population, to get to know the candidates, your website would be a great resource for people as well because they can read positions and various details there.
Absolutely. Yatesforidaho.com. It's FOR, not the number, Yatesforidaho.com. And if people search for my name, Steve Yates, on Facebook, they'll find a candidate page there, and there's some videos where we address specific issues and other kinds of positions that people can get a sense for where I stand on things. Having been blessed being the statewide Republican chairman for 3 years, I have traveled the state. Some people know me in that context. But I was presiding over a committee and wasn't really publicly advocating my particular views. And my views are not widely different from what people might expect from a state and national Republican leader. But please do have folks go through those sites, social and the website, to take a look at where I stand on a few things and ask questions at any time.
Hey, Mr. Yates, I've heard you mention several times about issues with we're not educating the kids to be job ready. So how do we go about arranging so that works a little bit more functional for the high school kids coming up?
Well, thank you, Steve. There are a couple of assumptions that I have just based on my life experience, and I've been married for 28 years to Idaho's greatest educator, my wife. It was a long contest, and there were very few judges, but she won in my view. And so I've consumed a great deal of education in my mind, but I've learned that teachers have a special gift, and I don't have that gift. But I've learned to listen to her more intently as the years go by. I just fundamentally believe that someone in the age of 16, 18, 28, 38, 58 may not necessarily know the industry or job from which you're going to retire. And the mission in education to me is to have kids and maybe even adults from time to time come through the process without crippling debt and jobs ready to receive them. And I've gone through processes in my own career that have helped in that way. One of them was a cooperative education program where a future employer would hire me and other students to alternate semesters or years of work. And it made sure that what I was studying in school was directly related to my future employment, and I had the promise of ongoing employment upon graduation. It took a little longer, so with my time as a missionary plus my time in the co-op program, I took 7 years to get a 4-year degree. That seemed to work out okay for my career. I don't know that parents will be thrilled to hear someone say, take the longer road, but we need time to have real-life experience and to grow up, to be better consumers, and to get better educated going through the process. But I also believe it's not an either-or question when it comes to vocational and technical training versus the traditional liberal arts curriculum. If we have someone that's going to be the world's greatest expert on 19th century English literature, that's awesome. But it would be great also if they got some kind of an apprenticeship going through the process, whether it's in high school or through their 4-year degree. And then they might be able to make some money on the side or realize that these are good-paying, career-ready jobs in Idaho. And they may find that for the next 10 years of their life, as they're building a family, establishing a home, that they can make a living and they can have their other education as the moonlight over those years. But really, all of us should be trying to be well-rounded with our skills being added as we go through life. And that's just something that was pounded into my head by my grandfather and my parents as I grew up. And I think it's one of those things that would help Idaho have a more stable, job-ready work pool as we go forward.
We got a little under a minute before the next break, and then we're going to talk about some of other experiences that Mr. Yates brings to the table as a candidate. But before we do that, with about 40 seconds, for people, again, who'd like to check out the website, where would you send them?
Yatesforidaho.com and search for Steve Yates on Facebook to find our campaign page.
All right, we've got more coming up with a candidate, a Republican, One of six now, as Steve Millington tells me, because the filing deadline was Friday, that are running for lieutenant governor in Idaho. And we want to point out we've got a short break at the bottom of the hour coming up at 8:30. Before we do, though, just a quick note. I wanted to remind you, we had a great visit last week on air with the doctors from Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. And when it comes to hearing health care, this is the only locally owned practice in southern Idaho. And doctors Pickup and Mitchell pride themselves on caring for each individual with customized and personal treatment plans. Mount Harrison Audiology cares about your health goals and will work with you to provide the best care possible. Call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today. That number, 208-312-0957, 208-312-0957. We've got more coming up with candidate for Lieutenant Governor Steve Yates in just a couple of minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 35. About 90 minutes ago, I happened to be walking by the TV monitor here in the studio, and the Fox Business Network was on, and they had a bulletin running about Rex Tillerson being out at the State Department as Secretary of State for President Trump, and he's going to be replaced by Mike Pompeo, who's been at CIA. Big shakeup. A lot of people say it's surprising that Tillerson lasted this long in that, call it cauldron, that you call the Trump administration. 8:34. That's not a criticism. I'm just telling you that's how it tends to work there. It's 35 right now. We're at 8:34. Bill Cowley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Joining us as a candidate this morning for Lieutenant Governor, Republican in Idaho. He's running in a primary, which is coming up in May, and that is Steve Yates. He's the former chairman of the state Republican Party in Idaho, and Steve Millington is with us. The other Steve, who's our Twin Falls County Republican Committee Chair, is also in the studio with us. But Mr. Yates, I guess from a lot of people may not know this, your background happens to be very much in international relations, and you had some experience in the White House too. This Tillerson situation shouldn't be a surprise, but still there's going to be some ripple effects from it.
There certainly will be ripple effects, and I congratulate you on having Fox Business on in the background. My former business partner, a guy named Christian Whiten, will be on with Stuart Varney this morning, and Christian spent the better part of the transition and most of last year as an appointee in the State Department trying to help Rex Tillerson, and I had some firsthand experience of the things that were working and not working, and I would count myself among those that was surprised that Tillerson made it all the way through 2017 as Secretary of State. I thought near the end of the year or possibly in January at his 1 year mark, he might change. There were just some things about the former ExxonMobil CEO that worked within the State Department, but some things that just didn't work in government. And Mike Pompeo is someone that has been an intelligence officer. He's currently at the CIA, but has a wealth of international experience, but also some of the important hardball that you need to know about what it takes to actually impose your management will on a bureaucracy that wants to resist, and whether people like it or not. And I have some respect for people who are career foreign service officers, but what I don't respect is that as a guild, they tend to stand against Republican appointees. And I look forward to Mike Pompeo bringing a little bit more management and driving of the president's agenda through the bureaucracy of the State Department, and maybe fill more of the vacancies that Rex has allowed to just go unfilled over the last year. And so I think this is an opportunity. The president has signaled really strong confidence in Mike Pompeo from the get-go. And so this is just one of those things that surprises people. There's change, but when you have a businessman as president, he measures results, and when he thinks it's time to change, he pulls the trigger.
Christian Whiten was actually on while we were talking, but I couldn't read his lips. So
there you go.
But we wanted to point out Steve Yates, of course, worked for Vice President Cheney, and you also have some experience because you speak Mandarin, which I would think that if we have to deal with the Chinese in any venue, state level or national, people who can speak the language probably are considered a bit more trustworthy.
Well, two of Idaho's top trade partners actually have Mandarin Chinese as their national language. And I think that when you look at where the future of Idaho is going to be determined, it's going to be things related to trade, but also some things Homeland Security. One of the important roles of governor and lieutenant governor from 9/11 forward has been the increasing Homeland Security role. And that's a somewhat unique set of experiences and skills that I would bring to hopefully help the next leader of Idaho be able to fulfill that mission. Keeping America safe, keeping Idaho safe is really important, but also promoting growth and development. And if we're really looking at competing with our neighbors to bring opportunity here, to sell more ag products, to help our tech and manufacturing opportunities grow, if we have someone that's a constitutional officer that can speak the nation's language that you're trying to engage for that opportunity, it just gives us a leg up relative to our competition. So I hope that would be a value added to our voters.
I'm sure that your competitors in the primary don't necessarily speak Mandarin or even Cantonese.
Well, I would brag on it, except for one of the reasons I speak Mandarin is that Spanish bedeviled me for a time because it assigned gender and other things to inanimate objects. And for me, Chinese was a simple language. I can't explain it, but I was a fish in water, and it just worked out great.
My brother learned Korean and said it wasn't that difficult, and I thought, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Well, Steve Yates, we'd like to thank you again. We've got about 30 seconds. What's the website again?
YatesForIdaho.com and Facebook, search for Steve Yates. And please encourage people to check out our videos and content. And if they have questions, be in touch anytime.
We want to thank you, and we look forward to your visit here next week.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve Yates joining us. Steve Yates, of course, is one of now half a dozen Republicans running for lieutenant governor in Idaho. We've got a break coming up in about 15 seconds. But Steve Millington, again, when is the primary?
The primary is May 15th.
So dead smack in the middle of the month.
Yeah, it's always the third Tuesday, and this year, because of the calendar, it seems to be much earlier than we normally anticipate. So it'll be May the 15th.
So just a little more than 2 months away. We're at 8:40. We've got more coming up with Steve Millington, who's in the studio with us. He's the chairman, of course, of the Twin Falls County Republican Party Committee. Bill Colley with you, too, and we want to thank Steve Yates for his time this morning. We're at 34 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.